Who's attaching random advanced weaponry to my livestock? This is your host, Plasma Chicken, and you are watching Beer Thunder, the video game thing where we talk about the plane thing. But this episode is actually going to be a lot different than my other content because this video is not at all about War Thunder. Yes, I will be using War Thunder footage to bed the video, but that's because I'm lazy, not because the video is actually about War Thunder. Now, what's this video actually going to be? Well, this video is going to be kind of one of those, your favorite thing actually kind of sucks IRL kind of videos. And basically what we're doing is we're making a laser pig video, but it's going to be about the Gripen. And we're actually going to do something that people might consider to be almost a journalism. In fact, you might consider this to be a companion video to his Stop Talking About the F-35 video. Now, I have to attempt to be a little bit forthcoming. I love watching these kind of videos where people talk about your favorite thing kind of sucking, but I also remain rather skeptical of them. A lot of the times these kinds of videos go way overboard in making very clear conclusions on extremely limited amounts of evidence. And I think that's kind of a flaw with the whole genre in general. Kind of selling a clear-cut conclusion is a lot more narratively interesting than going, we don't really know. So instead, what I'm going to do for this video is try to limit my scope to things that can be verified to be true in an attempt to honestly inform the limited audience for this video. So, why does the Gripen actually suck? Well, this video is not going to be a bit-by-bit technical breakdown of why the Gripen is inferior to comparable Lockmart alternatives like the F-16 or some overarching critique of the way the fighter is designed. But rather, this is going to be a critique of Gripen proponents themselves who spent the last decade comparing the Gripen to something that it isn't, an alternative to a 5th or 6th generation fighter. So strap right in and Gripen these nuts because we're going deep and it's not going to be consensual. Now, in order to understand how and why the Gripen truly sucks, we have to understand the information space that the Gripen exists in. Because what tends to happen inside of this information space is that any success that the Gripen has is magnified 100-fold, and any of its shortcomings are completely glossed over. What this means is that in general terms, the capabilities of the Gripen are vastly overstated, and there is a de facto cult that comes out of the woodwork anytime you say something that isn't glowingly positive about the plane. For better or worse, Gripen exists as the de facto antithesis to the F-35, where the F-35 is bulky and expensive, the Gripen is cheap and nimble. Where the F-35 is a boondoggle of a mismanaged program, the Gripen is the poster child of fiscal responsibility. You see a lot of propaganda that surrounds the Gripen is to amplify the narrative that the United States military-industrial complex and the United States Air Force is incompetent with its useless, expensive, garbage stealth fighters. It's because of this narrative that's developed mostly on the internet and in shoddy defense journalism circles over the past 20 years or so that the Gripen narrative has been formed. This meta-narrative that the F-35 is a useless junk plane and the Gripen is this supremely efficient and cheap superweapon is something that has been largely perpetuated by fighter mafia types. This narrative has also been so pervasive, in a lot of ways it has become de facto the truth, and it's increasingly hard to challenge. Now, with all of that being said, it would be helpful to have a baseline understanding of what the Gripen actually does, because in reality, the Gripen is a pretty run-of-the-mill 4th-generation fighter that was designed to meet Swedish doctrine. In reality, Saab ended up making a plane that is incredibly small, which comes with its own set of limitations, namely that it is inferior to larger planes when it comes to range and payload. Allegedly, Saab ended up making the plane half the size of the Viggen because they accidentally said that they would and backed themselves into a design corner that they couldn't get themselves out of. Now, as far as the 4th-generation fighter goes, in practice, the Gripen is not outright inferior. Saab did a pretty good job of making a plane that has very high performance within its size constraints. And they did a good job of integrating the latest technology at the time and the latest aerodynamic research at the time to design the aircraft. What the Gripen does very well is being a light fighter. In essence, you can look at it as the fully modernized F-5 Freedom Fighter, or what the F-20 sought to be. It is even a reasonable alternative to F-16s as long as the limitations the Gripen imposes fit your country's aerial doctrine. But at the end of the day, there is no replacement for displacement, and that is generally where I perceive the Gripen to fall short of other comparable fighters. Gripen fans will tell you that the only reason the plane loses contracts to other fighters is just politics, or that Lockmart is better at bribing all of the right people But the reality is that how much bullshit you can carry, how far you can carry that bullshit, and how many brown people you can bomb is a large part of fighter performance today. Having a 10-minute rearmament time becomes increasingly irrelevant if you're flying an hour back and forth between whatever your objective is, or if you have to use 6 fighters to deliver the same ordnance and time on station that could have been done otherwise with 3 larger fighters. This fact is especially detrimental to the latest Gripen variants because the next generation Gripen program never actually left the runway. The problem is that the Gripen is marketed as this incredibly smart and cheap fighter, but in order to cram all of the new 4.5 generation capabilities into the airplane, has resulted in a fighter whose cost rivals that of the F-35. And when it comes to other 4th-and-a-half generation fighters, the Gripen is losing out to the Rafale and even the Block 70 F-16, and for whatever reason, both of these planes are generally viewed as being equal or a better value than the Gripen E in most acquisition programs. And with this high acquisition cost that's close enough to an F-35 with capabilities that end up being nowhere similar, it should not be surprising that the F-35 just entered full rate production and has around 3 times the number of airframes built so far, and that number is only going to increase in the future. In a lot of ways, that isn't really the Gripen's fault. It's just kind of lost the whole entire acquisition roulette. In a lot of ways, the Rafale program went through a similar stint where the only buyer was France, but in recent history it's become far more popular. Basically, the Gripen is a cheap fighter that can't be cheap because nobody is buying it. And nobody is buying it because it's not cheap. It's a catch-22. Now, acknowledging this fact is probably going to send Gripen fans into a conniption fit, and they are going to talk about mean cost per flight hour or whatever. There is a good reason I am not talking about operating costs. Mainly, the problem with operating costs is that they are not an apples-to-apples comparison. Operating costs per flight hour can drastically change based on accounting methods that are used. Or, to put it simply, I can cook the books on operating costs by just including the cost of fuel and nothing else on one plane, and including every tertiary cost, including depot-level maintenance and lifetime upgrades in the other. Analyzing life cycle costs with publicly available information is just something that ends up going beyond my level of expertise. The reality of the situation has not stopped Gripen fans from making absolutely ludicrous claims. In order to understand this, it should be understood that the Venn diagram of Gripen fans and F-35 haters might as well be a concentric circle. And it is because of this artificially inflated reputation and coinciding agendas that Gripen fans are completely uncritical when completely false information is posted on the internet.
War. The Swedish Air Force and the Gripen had already been at the red flag a few times, the first time in 2006, with very good results. But this time was different. This time the Gripens were on the red team. They scored 10 kills, including Typhoons and F-16 Block 50+. During the whole red flag, they never lost an aerial encounter, they never failed the mission, they never delayed the mission for bad weather or technical problems. At the end of the exercise, the only fighter with a score better than the Gripen was the mighty F-22.
Buster, how do you know if any of this stuff is true?
What do you mean?
How do you know someone didn't just make it up?
Oh boy, that's a lot of claims in a very short amount of time. And this clip, mind you, is a perfect example of the woozle effect in action. What is the woozle effect? Well, I'm gonna just steal the laser pig clip and let a fat Scottish alcoholic explain it to you, so a fat American alcoholic doesn't need to paraphrase it.
Chapter 3 of the 1926 literary classic Winnie the Pooh describes the titular character Pooh Bear and his friend Piglet discovering a series of tracks which they assume to belong to a creature known as the woozle. Yet, as much as they follow these tracks in hunt of the mythical creature, they can never quite seem to catch up to it. Enter the book's protagonist, Christopher Robin, who, after some brief investigating, discovers that the tracks that Pooh Bear and Piglet have been following were in fact their own, and the woozle does not actually exist. Since then, the term the woozle effect has been used to describe a situation where a claim is made with little or no supporting evidence, usually in a book or an online publication, which then leads to various other publications citing it as a reference, without checking it or doing any proper peer review. Further publications then cite them as a reference, and so on and so forth until you have a chain of citations that simply reference each other as a sourceable material without ever actually presenting any credible evidence. Hence why things like Wikipedia or the fabled r/Ask Historians are so frequently wrong, as their criteria for any claim to be considered credible is that it has to have appeared written somewhere in a book. Hence why so many people think the F-35 is a useless, expensive garbage plane, because, well, the press say so, and they say so because, well, the other press say so, and they say so because, well, the first lot of press said so, and then you follow it all the way back down the bullshit tree until you get to the Russian propaganda channel Russia Today.
Now, where does our magical Gripen bullshit tree sprout from? Well, the source of our magical bullshit river is fucking Quora. We somehow managed to solely source a claim from a message board with about as much credibility as Reddit. We have somehow managed to find a source that might even be less credible than Pierre Sprey and Russia Today. Like, at least Pierre Sprey had to put effort into falsifying his credentials. So let's actually take a minute to evaluate the credibility of this anecdote. We have an online message board post that claims the Gripen went to Red Flag 2006 as the opposition force, that the Gripen shot down 15 opposing fighters while being at a huge disadvantage, including a Eurofighter Typhoon, that the Gripen never had a delay due to weather or technical failure, that the Gripen scored just as well as the F-22 in the same exercise. Now, let's slow down even a little bit more and consider the implications of these claims. The implication of the claims are essentially that the Gripen A/C represents a revolution in aerial warfare that exceeds that of the 5th generation fighters like the F-22 and renders the whole entire force structure of the United States Air Force obsolete. The 15-0 kill ratio exceeds the successes of what the United States Air Force and Marine Corps have claimed on the record that the F-35 has experienced in similar training exercises. And the Gripen did this all while participating on the OP-4 team with limited support. If this was actually the case, then the Gripen would be revolutionary and countries would be falling over themselves to actually buy the damn thing. So what actually happened with this story? Well, it was picked up by clickbait defense journalism outlets, and it was plastered all the way across the internet. Finally, there was verifiable proof and vindication that the Gripen was this invincible super fighter that its advocates had hyped it up to be, and that Saab's marketing team was not just blowing smoke up your ass. Or was it? So at no point during this story did anyone stop to ask any basic questions. The basicest of basicest questions. Absolutely no journalism happened. Zero fucking journalism. This whole entire story was taken as fact and reported down at pure face value. Some outlets even rephrased the post to make it seem like England was sitting down to be interviewed. Nobody actually stopped to consider the basics first, the basic facts. So first off, the biography of Stefan Öglen states that he left the Swedish Air Force in 1991. That's 15 years before Red Flag 2006 happened. There is no possibility that Öglen was even at the exercise. Second, nobody really questioned the timing of the post, the results of Red Flag 2006 coming out on an anonymous online message board 14 years after the exercise happened. Nobody stopped to consider why we would be hearing about this revolutionary fighter a decade and a half after the fact, because they had already swallowed a narrative in order to critique the F-35 program. It seemed incredibly innocuous to them and the world at large that the Swedish superfighter would do so well at its first red flag, because it already confirmed their preconceived notions of the plane. Certainly, if this had happened in 2006, we would have seen some kind of inkling of how well it did. Certainly, if this had happened in 2006, we would have seen some kind of inkling that it actually did. After all, something as relatively mundane as the F-22 losing a dogfight to a Eurofighter was a major defense news story in 2023. So much so that we know minute details of that specific scenario, like the fact that the F-22 was handicapping itself with external fuel tanks. Certainly, the whole entire Air Force taking a fat L to a plucky little fighter would have been a major news story in 2006. Well, in short, it wasn't a major scandal because it didn't fucking happen. While the kill ratio can't be verified, England puts a lot of details in his story that can be verified. Consequently, Millennium 7 also puts a lot of details in his story that can also be verified. And most of the important details that can be verified are absolutely and inexorbitantly wrong. The way that we can verify that they are inexorbitantly wrong is by utilizing a minimal amount of skepticism and doing a minimal amount of digging. You know, what I call doing a journalism. So, how do we know the England claims are false? Because he gets most of the basic details wrong about Red Flag 2006. I was actually able to utilize the Wayback Machine to find a primary source in the form of a news article that was posted on gripennews.com.org, whatever. It's a website that's associated with Saab. It was basically their Gripen advertising website at the time. At Deadlink now takes you to the current Saab website. And what does this article say about the England claims? Well, it's actually quite damning. First off, both of these articles claim that the Gripen was on blue team, not on the red team. This means the Gripens at Red Flag were operating in concert with United States Air Force planes and not acting as the opposition force. This also means that they had the same level of support as all of the other Allied fighters, and they were fighting an Op-4 that was effectively LARPing for whatever the scenario was. What was represented at Red Flag 2006 was not the Swedish Air Force versus the United States Air Force, but the Swedish and United States Air Force versus an unspecified adversary nation, i.e. Russia, or probably at the time it might have been LARPing for Libya, because we were really big into bombing brown people in like 2006. Like we had a major uptick in that like past like 2001. It kind of like, it was like basically like a couple years after the Iraq invasion as well. Second, on the list of attending nations, there is not a single nation that is a user of the Eurofighter Typhoon. How did the Gripen shoot down a plane during an exercise that was not even there? The same can be said about scoring as well as the F-22. How did the Gripen score as well as the F-22 in Red Flag 2006 if the first Red Flag that the F-22 attended was in 2007? Does it travel through time? I don't think so. I don't think the United States Air Force like declassified that technology yet. In reality, what happened at Red Flag 2006 is the Swedish Air Force proved that it could participate in a scenario that was de facto more or less probably bombing brown people. And it did relatively well at bombing brown people. So well, in fact, that Sweden pitched bombing brown people as a means to better market their jet. They got delayed for weather like everyone else does, because that is a safety consideration for the whole entire exercise, and they did miss a sortie due to a malfunctioning targeting pod. Overall, this is like a very good performance, but it's also not going to be controversial. They basically showed up and proved that they could do their job. So how did we get here? How did we get to a point where unverified message boards... How did we get to a point where unverified forum posts are taken as fact? Well, in large part, it's because it confirms what Gripen fans and F-35 naysayers expect. You see, if you didn't pay attention to the England post, and you didn't pay attention to something that is kind of an Easter egg, you would not have been inclined to dig even deeper. However, I am a plane nerd, and I was on a search for how good the plane actually turns IRL, and England made a mistake. He included this turn rate chart here. And if you have no idea about how airplanes are and how they turn, there's nothing really suspicious about this chart. It's rather innocuous. However, if you are terminally online like me, you can look at this chart and see at a glance that it's completely wrong. And if you're an inquiring mind, you might ask yourself, where did this heavily bullshit skewed chart come from? And what does this mean about the England fellow? Guess what? I have also an answer for that, and that rabbit hole goes even deeper than the England rabbit hole. Enter scene right, Mr. David Archibald. Now, if you're Australian, the name David Archibald might mean something to you. Or it might not. I think it really depends on how prolific the guy is. But if I was to hazard to guess, if you wanted a poster child for a right-wing cunt, his thumb-looking face would be one of the first guys to pop up. Unlike Stefan Ungland, we can actually verify that David Archibald is a real person, and as a real person, he is a real piece of work. When he isn't malding about Australia buying the light bomber F-35, he is celebrating the deaths of Palestinian women and children on Twitter, or celebrating the death of other Australian politicians on Twitter, or claiming that COVID vaccines are going to kill you because it's secretly AIDS, or claiming that climate change is not real. Seriously, this guy has a whole entire page dedicated to his bullshit that he spews about climate change. Now, our friend David Archibald is fairly smart. He is really good at making shit up and making it look extremely official. Imagine for a second if your average 4chan poster had a college degree and a professional background. The best way to describe Archibald is a three-way hybrid of Peer Spray, Mike Sparks, and your extremely racist uncle that you try not to make eye contact with at Christmas dinner, lest he launch into a tirade about the Jewish question. And like Mike Sparks and Pierre Spray, this guy has his own schizophrenic takes on the defense procurement of Australia. This is where this rather ridiculous turn rate chart comes from. Even in 2023, when the F-35 is a combat-proven aircraft, David Archibald is advocating for Australia to park its F-35s on the runway, don't even start them, don't even use them, and procure Gripens. In the year 2023, he still legitimately thinks the exchange ratio between the F-35 and the Su-35 would be in favor of the Su-35 because the F-35 can't dogfight. This is a man who's been advocates for replacing stealth bombers with airliners equipped with cruise missiles. No, seriously, check out his latest PowerPoint presentation. This is literally from this month. It's hilarious. The only thing that is actually missing is flying armored personnel carriers or trying to use nukes to harness the power of Godzilla. I think it is needless to say that David Archibald's background in national defense is basically non-existent. Like, this guy has no credibility. Everything he says is complete and almost totally nonsense. This man might actually be a hidden gem of extra spicy dog shit takes on national defense. Like, you might as well take anything that he says and do the opposite of it, because that would probably be an actually sound defense policy. Anyways, the problem with David Archibald isn't really that he exists. The problem with the Stefan Ungland claims isn't necessarily that they exist. Rather, the problem is that defense journalism is lacking any sense of, well, journalism. And this creates an information space where people who are fans of the Gripen, or any other fighter plane for that matter, are fully willing to accept any complete bullshit claims as long as it confirms their priors. And Saab doesn't really do itself any favors in this regard due to its marketing department. In essence, what happens is we take this fairly good 4th generation fighter that has some of its own merits, and then we completely oversell it to the point that people believe that it's some kind of revolutionary or near revolutionary platform. What this does is make Gripen fans into some of the most insufferable people you will ever run into on the internet, because they're going to uncritically parrot these fabricated anecdotes like Ungland, or uncritically read things of the unhinged rantings of David Archibald and think, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. And it's really because of this completely uncritical attitude that the Gripen is probably the most overrated fighter on the internet. Anyways, that's the video. Please like and subscribe if you like this kind of content, or leave an angry comment, it's fine. I would like to thank our sponsors, the Raytheon Corporation and the Lockheed Martin Group. You guys did buy me a 12-pack apiece, so that's why you guys are getting this video. It's a real cheap subscription fee. Saab, if you want me to say like good things about your jet, I don't know, teach me how to fly one, and send me some Swedish beer. Anyways, that's the video. Don't get butthurt, or do. It'll be funny. Anyways, if you made it to 25 minutes into this video of me incoherently ranting, you guys can just enjoy the rest of this little dogfight in the video game called War Thunder, a game that I'm not actually sponsored by, so I don't know why I'm even advertising them. But you know what? If you want to suffer, download the game and play it.